Jake Morrison stood outside the classroom door and took a deep breath. His hands were sweaty, and his heart was beating fast. This was his first day at the Galactic Academy, and he was nervous. Very nervous. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Jake stepped inside. The classroom was huge, much bigger than any classroom back on Earth. Strange lights floated near the ceiling, casting a soft blue glow over everything. The air smelled different, too, like flowers mixed with something. He could not name, but what really caught his attention were the other students. Jake had seen pictures of aliens before, but seeing them in person was different. There were so many different types. Some looked like walking crystals that sparkled in the light. Others had 6 arms and moved like dancers. A few looked like walking trees with branches for arms. Some were just floating clouds of gas inside clear suits. All of them turned to look at Jake when he walked in. The room became very quiet. Jake felt his face turn red. He was the only human in the room, and everyone was staring at him. He heard whispers in languages he did not understand. Some of the tree-like aliens moved their branches in what looked like worry. The crystal beings changed colors, flashing, from blue to yellow to red. "Welcome, Jake Morrison from Earth," said a voice that sounded like wind chimes. Jake looked toward the front of the classroom and saw the teacher. Professor Kethfer was one of the crystal beings, but much larger than. The student's body was made of what looked like living glass, and colors moved through him like water. "Thank you, Professor," Jake said. His voice sounded too loud in the quiet room. "Please, take a seat anywhere you like," Professor Kethfer said. The colors in his body shifted to warm gold, which Jake hoped meant he was being friendly. Jake looked around the room. Most of the seats were empty, but the students seemed to be sitting in groups based on what type of alien they were. The crystal students sat together on one side. 6-armed ones sat in another area. The tree-like aliens had a section with special chairs that looked like large flower pots. Jake picked an empty seat in the middle of the room. As he walked over, he noticed that some of the students moved away from him. Not in a mean way, but like they were scared. This made Jake feel bad. He did not want anyone to be afraid of him. A student with 6 arms and purple skin was sitting nearby. She had large, kind eyes and wore what looked like a flowing robe made of silver fabric. Jake sat down next to her and smiled. "Hey," he said quietly. "I'm Jake." The 6-armed student looked surprised.
"Oh."
"People." Her voice was soft and musical. "You are the human." Yes, I'm from Earth," Jake said. I tried to sound friendly and normal, but he could tell Xanthus was nervous. "We have heard stories about your world," she said carefully. "It sounds very dangerous." Jake laughed, but not in a mean way. "I guess it is, compared to other planets. But it's home, you know. We're used to it." Xanthus nodded, but Jake could see she did not really understand. How could she? Her world was probably safe and peaceful. Nothing like Earth with its storms and earthquakes and wild animals. Professor Kethfer began the class. "Today we will review the basic principles of energy and motion," he said. "These are important concepts that all civilized species must understand to travel between stars." Jake pulled out his tablet and started taking notes. The math looked familiar, but some of the examples were strange. Professor Kethfer talked about moving objects in zero gravity and calculating energy needed for space travel. These were things Jake had never really thought about before. "Who can tell me," Professor Kethfer asked, "how much energy would be needed to move a space station from one orbit to another?" Several students raised their hands, arms, or branches. A crystal student named Lathini answered first. She spoke in a voice like singing bells and gave a very long answer full of complicated math. Jake tried to follow along, but it was hard. Then Professor Kethfer asked a different question. "What about moving something much smaller, like a broken ship, away from a dangerous area quickly?" This time Jake found himself raising his hand without thinking. Professor Kethfer's colors shifted to surprise, but he nodded at Jake. "Well," Jake said, "back on Earth, if we needed to move something heavy quickly, we might use an explosion, like set off some dynamite on one side to push it away from whatever was dangerous. The classroom became very quiet again. Aroundin saw that all the students were staring at him with wide eyes or whatever they used to see. Even Professor Kethfer had stopped changing colors completely. An explosion? Asked Zix, one of the tree-like students. His voice sounded like leaves rustling, but with a note of shock. Yeah, Jake said, wondering if he had said something wrong. I mean, you have to be careful about how much explosive you use and which direction you want things to go. But it's pretty effective for moving heavy stuff. Xanthus leaned away from Jake slightly. Your people use explosions to solve problems? She asked. Sometimes, Jake said. When we need to move rocks to build roads, or break up ice jams in rivers, or demolish old buildings. It's just a tool like a hammer or a saw. Professor Kethfer's colors started moving again. Cycling through what Jake was learning meant confusion. Fascinating, he said slowly. On most worlds, explosions are considered uncontrolled and dangerous. They can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, Jake agreed. But humans have been using controlled explosions for hundreds of years. We're pretty good at it. A floating gas cloud in a suit made a sound like steam escaping. That was Nelvora, Jake remembered. Your species uses controlled destruction as a regular tool? She asked through her suit speaker. Sure, Jake said. We also use fire to cook food and heat our homes. And we use electricity, which can kill you if you're not careful. I guess we use a lot of dangerous things, but we learn how to use them. Safely, the students exchanged looks with each other. Jake was starting to realize that maybe humans were more unusual than he had thought. On Earth, using dangerous things carefully was normal, but these aliens seemed to think it was crazy. Professor Kethfer cleared his throat, which sounded like crystal bells ringing. That is certainly an interesting perspective, Jake. Perhaps you can share more about human methods as we continue our studies. The rest of the class continued, but Jake noticed that the other students kept glancing at him. When the professor asked questions about energy and force, Jake found that he understood the concepts better than he expected. Growing up on Earth, where everything was trying to kill you, meant humans learned a lot about forces and energy just to survive. When class ended, Jake packed up his tablet. Xanthus was still sitting next to him, but she seemed thoughtful rather than scared now, Jake, she said, as they walked toward the door. Would you like to study together sometime? I think I could learn much from your unique perspective. Sure, Jake said, smiling. I'd like that. And maybe you can help me understand some of the space stuff better. This zero-gravity math is tricky. As they walked out together, Jake heard other students whispering behind them. He caught words in various languages, but the tone was clear. They were talking about him, and about the strange things humans did. Jake shrugged. He was used to being different. After all, he was probably the only person in this school who had ever seen a tornado, or a lightning storm, or a wild bear. Other students came from safe, peaceful worlds where the most dangerous thing was probably a strong breeze. He was starting to think that this school year was going to be very interesting. 3 weeks had passed since Jake's first day at the Galactic Academy. He was starting to get used to the strange routine of living in space. Artificial gravity felt normal now, and he had learned to eat the weird alien food without making faces. Some of it actually tasted good, though he still missed pizza and hamburgers from Earth. Jake had made friends with several of his classmates. Xanthus, the 6-armed Veltari girl, had become his study partner. He was very smart and patient, helping him understand the complicated space math. In return, Jake helped her with physics problems that involved forces and motion. Out that growing up on a dangerous planet had taught him a lot about how things moved and crashed into each other. Zix, the tree, like Thornling, also warmed up to Jake. At first, Zix had been scared of the human boy, but now they often sat together at lunch. Zix was fascinated by Jake's stories about Earth weather. The idea of water falling from the sky was amazing to someone whose planet only had gentle morning mists. Even Nelvora, the gas cloud nebulite, had started talking to Jake more, why she was curious about how humans could live with such solid, heavy bodies on a world with such strong gravity. Jake tried to explain that they were built for it, but Nelvora found it hard to believe that anyone could be happy weighing so much. Professor, Kethver seemed pleased that Jake was fitting in. The crystal teacher's colors stayed in happy gold and blue tones during class now, instead of the worried reds and purples from Jake's first week. Jake was keeping up with most of the classwork, though he still struggled with some of the more advanced concepts about space travel and energy distribution. The other students had gotten used to Jake's unusual answers to questions. When Professor Kethver asked about solving problems, Jake often suggested methods that involved force or controlled destruction. The aliens had learned that this was just how humans thought. They found it strange but interesting. On this particular morning, Jake walked into the classroom feeling good. He had finally figured out how to work the shower in his dorm room. He had gotten a message from his parents back on Earth. Everything seemed normal as he took his usual seat next to Xanthus. "Good morning, everyone, Professor Kethver," said his crystalline body glowing with warm morning colors. "I hope you all had a restful night. Today I have a special assignment for you." The class grew quiet. Special assignments usually meant difficult work. Jake pulled out his tablet and got ready to take notes. "This assignment will test everything you have learned about energy, motion, and problem solving," Professor Kethver continued. "You will work alone, and you will have 1 week to complete it." A few students made worried sounds. Lithani, the crystal girl, flickered between nervous yellow and blue. Zix rustled his branches, and what Jake had learned meant anxiety. Professor Kethver waved one of his crystal arms. A holographic display appeared in the air above his desk. It showed a large gray rock floating in space. Numbers and measurements appeared around it. "Here is your problem," the professor said. "This asteroid weighs 50,000 tons. It is currently in an orbital path that will take it dangerously close to a populated space station in 6 months. Your job is to design a way to move this asteroid to a safe orbit." Jake looked at the hologram with interest. The asteroid was big, but not impossibly huge. The space station shown in the display looked like a spinning wheel with thousands of people living inside it. "You must use only technology and resources available to a Type 2 civilization," Professor Kethver went on. "This means you cannot use the most advanced tools, but you have access to basic space travel, energy collectors, and construction equipment." More details appeared in the holographic display. Jake saw lists of available tools and energy sources. There were ion drives, solar collectors, gravitational calculators, and lots of other equipment he did not recognize. "You must explain how you would move the asteroid, how much energy you would need, and how long it would take," Professor Kethver said. "Most importantly, you must make sure your solution is safe for everyone involved." Around the classroom, students were already looking worried. Jake heard Xanthus make a soft sound of concern. This was clearly a very difficult problem. "Remember," Professor Kethver added, "this is the kind of problem that real space engineers face. Moving large objects safely requires careful planning. In precise calculations, there is no room for error when millions of lives are at stake." A student raised her hand. It was Lithani, the crystal girl who was always good at math. "Professor, how much time do we have to work on this?" 1 week, Professor Kethver replied. "I suggest you start immediately. This will require extensive research and complex calculations." Another student, a floating gas cloud named Veltar, asked, "Should we work in groups?" "No," the professor said firmly. "This is an individual assignment. I want to see how each of you approaches this problem on your own." Jake looked around the classroom. Most of his classmates looked scared or overwhelmed. Xanthus was already pulling out advanced calculators and reference books. Zix was muttering to himself about orbital mechanics and gravitational fields. But Jake was not worried. In fact, he was starting to smile. This problem reminded him of something he had seen on a documentary back on Earth. It was about protecting Earth from dangerous asteroids. The scientists had come up with some interesting solutions. "Are there any other questions?" Professor Kethver asked. A few students asked about specific technical details. They wanted to know about energy requirements and safety protocols. Jake listened, but he was already thinking about his answer. "Very well," Professor Kethver said. "You have 1 week. I expect detailed presentations next Friday. Please remember that this assignment counts for a large portion of your final grade." As the class ended, students began talking nervously to each other. Even though they were supposed to work alone, they were discussing how difficult the problem was and sharing their worries. "This is impossible," said one of the crystal students. "Moving something that heavy would require the energy output of an entire star system. And the calculations added a 6-armed Valtari boy. We would need to account for gravitational effects from 3 different planets and 2 moons. Safety requirements alone will take days to figure out," worried Nalvora through her. Suit's speaker. Jake packed up his tablet and stood to leave. Xanthus looked at him with concern. "Jake, are you not worried about this assignment?" she asked. "Not really," Jake said with a shrug. "It seems pretty straightforward." Xanthus stared at him. "Straightforward? Jake, this is one of the most complex problems in orbital mechanics. We will need to use advanced mathematics and consider hundreds of variables." "Maybe," Jake said. "But I think there might be a simpler way to handle it." "Simpler?" Zix had overheard, and rustled over to them. "How could moving a 50,000-ton asteroid be simple?" Jake grinned. "Well, back on Earth, when we need to move something really big and heavy, we don't usually try to push it gently. We give it a good strong shove in the right direction." "A shove?" Nalvora floated closer, her gaseous form swirling with curiosity. "What do you mean by a shove?" Jake said, still smiling. "Like when you need to move a big rock out of the way. You don't try to roll it slowly. You use some dynamite to blast it where you want it to go." The 3 aliens stared at Jake in silence. Around them, other students had stopped talking and were listening to. "Jake," Xanthus said carefully, "are you suggesting that we should explode the asteroid?" "Not explode it," Jake said. "Just explode something next to it to push it in a new direction. It's like giving it a really big kick." "But," Zix said, his branches trembling, "the radiation, the debris, the unpredictable trajectory changes, ... double quotes." Jake waved his hand dismissively. "That's what the math is for. You calculate exactly how big an explosion you need and exactly where to put it. Then boom, problem solved." The aliens continued to stare at him. Jake was starting to realize that maybe his solution was not as obvious to them as it was to him. "I should probably get started on the calculations," Jake said. "See you guys later." He walked away. Jake heard his classmates whispering behind him. He caught words like dangerous and crazy and typical human. But he also heard brilliant. And why didn't we think of that? Jake smiled to himself as he headed back to his dorm room. Sometimes the best solutions were the simplest ones. All he needed to do was figure out exactly how big an explosion would. B needed to push a 50,000-ton asteroid into a new orbit, back on Earth. This would be considered a pretty standard engineering problem. He was sure he could work it out in a day or 2, leaving him plenty of time to double-check his math and make sure everything was safe. What Jake did not realize was that his casual approach to using nuclear weapons as problem-solving tools was about to shock his alien classmates in ways he could never imagine. The week had passed quickly, and now it was Friday morning. Jake woke up feeling relaxed and ready for the presentations. He had finished his assignment on Tuesday and spent the rest of the week helping other students with their regular homework. His solution was simple and clean, written on just 3 pages of his tablet. Down the hall, we could hear stressed voices coming from other dorm rooms. Students had been working day and night all week, and many of them looked exhausted. Jake had seen Xanthus in the library every morning with huge piles of books and her advanced calculator. Zix had been muttering equations to himself during lunch, his branches twitching with worry. Jake grabbed his tablet and headed to breakfast. In the dining hall, he saw his classmates sitting together in small groups, all looking nervous. Some were still working on their presentations, making last-minute changes to their calculations. "Morning, everyone," Jake said cheerfully, as he sat down with his usual group. Xanthus looked up from her tablet with tired eyes. She had been working all night, and it showed. "Jake, how are you so calm? You not realize how important this presentation is?" "Sure I do," Jake said, taking a bite of something that tasted like scrambled eggs but was bright purple. "But I finished my project days ago. There's no point in worrying about it now." Zix rustled his branches in amazement. "You finished days ago. I have been working for 18 hours straight, and I am still not sure my calculations are correct." Many pages is your presentation? Asked Nelvora, her gaseous form swirling anxiously inside her containment suit. 3, Jake said simply. The table went quiet. Lithani, who was sitting nearby, flickered from blue to bright orange, which Jake had learned meant shock. 3 pages, she asked. My presentation is 47 pages long, and I still feel like I have not covered everything. Mine is 62 pages, Xanthus said weakly, and that is just the math section. The safety protocols are another 30 pages. Jake shrugged. I guess I just kept it simple. The aliens exchanged worried looks. They had all assumed that Jake was struggling with the assignment because he had seemed so casual about it. They were starting to wonder if maybe he had not understood how complex the problem was supposed to be. Zik said gently. Are you sure you understood the assignment correctly? Professor Kethfer said this was one of the most difficult problems in orbital mechanics. Yeah, I got it, Jake said. Move a big rock from one orbit to another. Pretty straightforward. Novora made a sound like steam escaping. But what about the gravitational calculations? The energy requirements? The safety protocols for the space station? All covered, Jake said, finishing his breakfast. Look, I should probably head to class early to set up. See you guys there. As Jake left, his friends sat in stunned silence. They were starting to realize that either Jake was about to embarrass himself terribly, or he had found a solution that none of them had thought of. In the classroom, Professor Kethfer was setting up the holographic display system. Students began filing in, carrying tablets, data crystals, and portable hologram projectors. The room filled with nervous energy as everyone prepared for their presentations. Good morning, class, Professor Kethfer said, his crystalline body glowing with formal silver colors. I hope you are all ready to share your solutions. Remember, these presentations will show me how well you understand the principles we have been studying. He looked around the room. Who would like to present first? Several hands went up immediately. The students who had finished their work early were eager to get their presentations over with. Others, who were still making last-minute changes, tried to avoid eye contact. Lithani, please begin, Professor Kethfer said. The crystal girl stood up and activated her hologram projector. The air above her desk filled with a beautiful, complex display showing the asteroid, the space station, and a network of spacecraft and equipment. My solution involves a gradual orbital adjustment using solar energy collectors and ion propulsion systems, Lithani began. Her voice was clear and confident, despite her earlier nervousness. The hologram showed massive solar panel, arrays being positioned around the asteroid. Thin beams of energy connected them to small thrusters attached to the rock's surface. First, we would need to construct 47 solar collection stations, Lithani continued. Each station would be approximately 2 kilometers wide and would collect energy from the local star. This energy would power ion drives that would slowly push the asteroid into a new orbit. She gestured, and the hologram began moving, showing the asteroid's path slowly changing over time. The total energy requirement would be equivalent to the complete output of 3 star systems for a period of 200 years, she said. The asteroid would reach its new safe orbit in exactly 203 years, 4 months, and 16 days. Professor Kethfer nodded approvingly, his colors shifting to pleased blues and greens. Excellent work, Lithani. Your safety margins are very conservative, which is appropriate for this type of operation. Thank you, Professor. I have also prepared detailed safety protocols that would protect the space station throughout the entire process. She touched her tablet, and more information appeared in the hologram. All work would be done by remote-controlled equipment with no sentient beings within 50 million kilometers of the asteroid at any time. The class murmured appreciatively. It was an impressive presentation, full of careful calculations and beautiful visualizations. Any questions for Lithani? Professor Kethfer asked. A few students asked about technical details, which Lithani answered expertly. She had clearly thought of everything. Well done, Professor Kethfer said. Nelvora, you are next. The nebulite floated to the front of the room, her gaseous form shimmering inside her containment suit. Her hologram was even more complex than Lithani's, showing gravitational waves and energy fields that Jake could barely understand. My approach uses gravitational wave manipulation, Nelvora announced through her suit's speakers. By creating precise distortions in space-time, you can gradually alter the asteroid's orbital path without applying any direct force to it. The hologram showed the asteroid moving through space, but instead of being pushed by rockets or energy beams, it seemed to slide along invisible curves in space itself. This method requires only the energy output of a single star. Nelvora continued, but the process would take 500 years to complete. The advantage is that it is completely safe, with no risk of debris or radiation affecting the space station. Jake watched in amazement as Nelvora explained her solution. The math was incredibly complex, involving equations that hurt his brain to look at. But he had to admit it was elegant, like a cosmic ballet where the asteroid danced its way to safety. The technical challenges are significant, Nelvora admitted. We would need to build gravitational wave generators larger than most planets. But the safety benefits make it worthwhile. More students presented their solutions. Each one was more elaborate than the last. Zik showed a plan that involved growing special plants on the asteroid that would gradually change its mass distribution. A Veltari student named Kexelin demonstrated a method using thousands of tiny spacecraft that would slowly tow the asteroid like ants moving a crumb. Every solution was beautiful, complex, and required either centuries of time or the resources of entire solar systems. The students had clearly put enormous effort into their work. Professor Kethfer praised each presentation. As more students presented, Jake noticed a pattern. All of the solutions treated the asteroid like something precious and fragile that needed to be moved with extreme care. They all assumed that any mistake would be catastrophic, and that safety required moving very slowly and using very little force. The presentations continued for over an hour. Students showed incredible creativity and mathematical skill. Some solutions were so complex that Jake could not follow them at all. Others were so beautiful that they looked more like art than engineering. Finally, Professor Kethfer looked around the room. Is there anyone else who would like to present? Jake realized that he was the only student who had not gone yet. Every other student had already shown their elaborate, careful solutions. Now it was his turn. I guess that's me, Jake said, standing up. He walked to the front of the room, carrying only his simple tablet. No hologram projector, no data crystals, no complex equipment, just a basic tablet with a few simple diagrams. The other students leaned forward with interest. After seeing so many elaborate presentations, they were curious about what the human had come up with. Some looked sympathetic, expecting Jake to struggle with the complex concepts they had all mastered. Professor Kethfer's colors shifted to encouraging gold. Please, Jake, show us your solution. Jake connected his tablet to the room's display. System. A simple diagram appeared on the wall showing the asteroid, the space station, and what looked like a small spacecraft. Okay, Jake said, turning to face the class. So I need to move this 50,000-ton asteroid to a new orbit, right? Class nodded. That was indeed the assignment. Jake pointed to his diagram. Here's what I would do. Jake cleared his throat and looked at his simple diagram on the wall. The classroom was completely quiet. After all the complex presentations with their beautiful holograms and complicated math, everyone was curious to see what the human had come up with. So like I said, I need to move this asteroid, Jake began, pointing at the gray rock on his diagram. It weighs 50,000 tons, and it's going to hit that space station in 6 months if we don't do something. He tapped his tablet, and a small object appeared next to the asteroid in the diagram. It looked like a simple cylinder with fins on one end. My solution is pretty straightforward, Jake continued. I would send a small spacecraft to the asteroid. The ship would carry one. Nuclear warhead, probably about the size of the bombs we used to have back on Earth during the old wars. The room became so quiet that Jake could hear the humming of the air recycling system. He looked around and saw that every single student was staring at him with what looked like shock. Even Professor Kethfer had stopped changing colors completely, his crystalline body frozen in surprised silver. The spacecraft would land on the asteroid, Jake went on, not noticing the stunned silence. Or actually, it would probably just attach itself to the surface with some kind of magnetic clamps. Then we would set a timer for the bomb. Jake tapped his tablet again, and the diagram showed a small explosion on one side of the asteroid. The bomb goes off. It would create a big explosion on one side of the rock. The force from the explosion would push the asteroid in the opposite direction, kind of like when you push off the wall of a swimming pool to move backward. He pointed to the arrow on his diagram showing the asteroid's new path. The explosion would give the asteroid enough push to change its orbit and miss the space station completely. Total time needed would be maybe 3 days to get the spacecraft there, a few hours to attach the bomb and set it up, and then about 3 seconds for the actual explosion. Jake looked around the room and was surprised to see that nobody was taking notes. Usually students wrote down everything during presentations. Instead, they were all just staring at him with their mouths open, or whatever they used for mouths. Anyway, Jake continued, starting to feel a little nervous about the silence. The energy requirements are pretty low. You just need enough fuel to get the spacecraft to the asteroid, and then 1 nuclear bomb. We're not talking about the energy output of star systems or anything crazy like that. Small hand slowly went up. It was Lathini, the crystal girl, who had presented first. Her body was flickering between colors so fast that it was hard to look at. Yes, Jake said, glad that someone was finally reacting. Jake, Lathini said in a voice that sounded like breaking glass. Did you just say you want to explode the asteroid? Well, not exactly explode the asteroid itself, Jake said, trying to be helpful. More like explode something right next to it. The asteroid would stay in one piece, mostly. It might get a few cracks, but that's not really a problem since it's just a big rock floating in space. Zix, the tree-like student, made a sound like wind through dead leaves. But Jake, what about the radiation from the nuclear explosion? What? About the debris that would fly off in all directions? Jake scratched his head. Well, space is really big and mostly empty, so the radiation would spread out and become harmless pretty quickly. And yeah, some small pieces of rock might break off, but they would be tiny compared to the main asteroid. We could calculate the trajectory to make sure the debris doesn't hit anything important. Calculate the trajectory, Xanthus said weakly. She looked like she was going to faint, which was impressive since Jake didn't know that 6-armed aliens could faint. Sure, Jake said, it's just basic physics. Force equals mass times acceleration and all that. Figure out how big an explosion. You need where to place it, and which direction you want the asteroid to go. Then you do the math to make sure it ends up in the right orbit. Adavora, the gas cloud student, made a sound like a teapot whistling. Jake, on your homeworld, do you solve problems by exploding things regularly? Jake shrugged. When it makes sense, yeah. I mean, we don't go around blowing things up for fun, but when you have a big problem that needs a quick solution, sometimes you just need to apply enough force in the right direction. He gestured at his diagram. Look, this asteroid is basically just a really big rock that's in the wrong place. Back on Earth, if we had a big rock blocking a road or something, we would use dynamite to move it or break it up. This is the same thing, just bigger and in space. Professor Kethfer finally found his voice. Jake, he said carefully, his colors shifting to confused purples and yellows. When you say nuclear warhead, do you mean a weapon designed to destroy cities? Well, yeah, that's what they were originally made for, Jake admitted. But we also use them for peaceful things, like digging canals and mining operations. Just a tool for moving a lot of dirt or rock really fast. The classroom erupted. In whispers and shocked exclamations, students were talking to each other in their various languages. But Jake could tell from their tones that they were all saying the same thing. They were amazed and horrified that humans casually used city-destroying weapons as construction tools. But the danger, said a Veltari student named Kexelin, what if something goes wrong? What if the explosion is too big, or too small, or pushes the asteroid in the wrong direction? That's what the math is for, Jake said patiently. We calculate everything ahead of time. How much explosive power you need, exactly where to place it, what angle to set it at. We've been doing controlled explosions for hundreds of years. Pretty good at it by now. Controlled explosions, repeated Zix in a horrified whisper. Yeah, Jake said, warming up to his topic. Back on Earth, we use explosives for all kinds of things. Mining, construction, demolition, clearing land, breaking up ice on rivers. Sometimes, when there's an avalanche blocking a mountain pass, we set off controlled explosions to clear it safely. He looked around the room at all the shocked faces. I mean, fire can burn down your house, but we still use it to cook food and heat our homes. Electricity can kill you, but we use it to power our lights and computers. Just because something is dangerous doesn't mean it's not useful, as long as you know what you're doing. Student in the back of the room raised a tentacle. Jake, have humans ever actually done this? Used nuclear weapons to move asteroids? Not asteroids specifically, Jake said, but we have plans for it. Our scientists figured out years ago that if a big asteroid was heading for Earth, we could probably deflect it with nuclear weapons. It's one of our main strategies for planetary defense. Professor Kethfer's colors were cycling through the entire spectrum now. Planetary defense, he repeated slowly. Sure, Jake said. Earth gets hit by space rocks all the time. Usually they're small and just burn up in our atmosphere, but every few million years a really big one comes along. The dinosaurs got wiped out by one about 65 million years ago. We don't want that to happen to us, so we keep an eye on the sky and have plans for dealing with dangerous asteroids. And your plan is to explode them, said Nelvora faintly.
Emma.
Other options? Yeah, Jake said. We could also try to land on one and set up rocket engines to push it slowly, like some of you guys suggested. But that takes a lot of time and equipment. Sometimes you need a fast solution, and explosions are fast. He tapped his tablet, and his simple diagram appeared again. Look, I know this seems different from your approaches, but it really works. The math is simple, the equipment is simple, and it gets the job done quickly. Total cost would be maybe the price of one small spacecraft plus one bomb. Total time, less than a week from start to finish. Jake looked around the room at all the stunned faces. Plus, if we did this right, we could probably use the asteroid's new orbit for something useful. Maybe as a mining operation or a research station. When you move something with a gentle push, you have to be really careful about where it ends up. When you give it a good solid kick, you can aim it wherever you want. The silence in the room was deafening. Jake was starting to realize that maybe his solution was more shocking to his alien classmates than he had expected. Any questions? He asked hopefully. Every hand, arm, tentacle, and branch in the room shot up at once. Professor Kethfer looked around the classroom at all the raised hands, arms, tentacles, and branches. His crystalline body was cycling through colors so fast that he looked like a living rainbow. He had never seen his students so eager to ask questions or so shocked by a presentation. One at a time, please, he said, his voice sounding strained. Lithani, you may ask first. The crystal girl stood up, flickering between nervous yellow and confused blue. Jake, she said carefully, your solution would work mathematically. I can see that. But tell me honestly, on your homeworld, is this approach considered normal? Jake thought about it for a moment. Pretty normal, yeah. I mean, it's not like we blow things up every day just for fun. But when we have a big problem that needs a fast solution, we usually look for the most direct way to fix it. He gestured toward his simple diagram. Back home, we have a saying. If you want to make an omelet, you have to break some eggs. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to hit it really hard with something big. Zix raised several of his branches. But Jake, what about the environmental impact? The radiation? The destruction? Well, Jake said, space doesn't really have an environment to worry about. It's mostly empty vacuum. And like I said, the radiation would spread out and become harmless pretty quickly. As for destruction, we're not really destroying anything important. It's just a big rock that's in the wrong place. Nelvora floated higher in her containment. Suit, when you say humans have been doing controlled explosions for hundreds of years, what exactly do you mean? Jake scratched his head. Well, we started with simple gunpowder for mining and warfare. Then we invented dynamite, which was much better for moving large amounts of rock and dirt. Eventually, we figured out nuclear weapons, which are really just very big explosions that can move very large amounts of stuff. He paused, thinking. I guess humans have always been good at breaking things when we need to. We break rocks to build roads. We break ground to plant crops. We break ice to free ships. We break down old buildings to make room for new ones. It's just how we solve problems. Xanthus raised 2 of her 6 arms. Jake, you mentioned that. Your people use these weapons for peaceful purposes too. Can you give us examples? Sure, Jake said enthusiastically. Back in the 20th century, we used nuclear explosions to dig harbors and canals. We used them in mining operations too. Break up huge amounts of rock at once. The Soviet Union used them to put out gas well fires that were too big to stop any other way. The alien students exchanged shocked looks. Professor Kethfer's colors had settled into a steady pattern of amazed purple and gold. We even had a project called Orion where we were going to build spaceships powered by nuclear explosions, Jake continued. The idea was to drop bombs behind the ship and ride the explosions to other planets. It would have been really fast. We're going to travel through space by exploding nuclear weapons behind your ship, asked a Veltari student in disbelief. Yeah, it would have worked great, Jake said. The only reason we didn't build it was because we signed treaties saying we wouldn't put nuclear weapons in space. But the math worked out perfectly. Professor Kethfer finally spoke up. Jake, your solution is remarkably efficient. It would, indeed, solve the problem quickly and with minimal resources. But help me understand something. When your people encounter a difficult problem, do you always look for the most forceful solution? Jake thought about this seriously. Not always, he said. But we do look for the most direct solution. If there's a simple way to fix something, we usually prefer that over a complicated way. He pointed at the presentations his classmates had. Given all of your solutions were really smart and careful, but they would take hundreds of years and use incredible amounts of energy. My way would take less than a week and use hardly any energy at all. But the risk, said Lethini. If something goes wrong, then we try again, Jake said with a shrug. Maybe with a bigger bomb, or a smaller one, or better aim. The nice thing about this approach is that if it doesn't work the first time, you can usually try again pretty quickly. The room fell silent again. The aliens were beginning to understand something important about humans that they had never realized. Before, Kexelin raised a tentacle. Jake, you said that everything on your planet tries to kill you. Is this why humans think this way? Because you have to solve problems quickly or die? Jake nodded. That's probably part of it. On Earth, if you spend too much time planning, sometimes the problem gets worse while you're thinking about it. Like if there's a forest fire, you don't have years to come up with a perfect solution. You need to stop it right now, even if that means setting smaller fires to block its path or dropping tons of water on it from aircraft. You fight fire with fire? Asked Zix in amazement. Sometimes, yeah, Jake said. And we fight floods with explosions to break ice dams. We fight landslides with more explosions to clear the debris. We fight avalanches by setting off controlled avalanches first. Nelvora's gaseous form was swirling rapidly inside her suit, so humans solved dangerous problems by creating different dangerous situations. I guess you could put it that way, Jake said. We call it controlled danger. Like if a building is about to fall down and hurt people, we use explosives to make it fall down in a safe direction instead. Professor Kethfer was taking notes on a crystal tablet, his colors shifting to fascinated blues and greens. This is remarkable, he said. Jake, would it be fair to say that humans have learned to use destruction as a tool for creation? Jake smiled. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Sometimes you have to break things to build something better. Looked thoughtful. This is why Jake's solution seemed so simple to him. To us, moving an asteroid is a delicate problem that requires careful planning. To Jake, it's just another big rock that needs to be moved. Exactly, Jake said. I mean, I understand why you guys want to be careful. Your planets are safe and peaceful, so you probably don't have much experience with dangerous solutions. But on Earth, we use dangerous things safely all the time. He gestured around the room. Even this space station uses controlled nuclear reactions for power. You're all sitting in a metal can flying through space at thousands of kilometers per hour. None of that is really safe, but we make it safe by understanding the risks and controlling them. Professor Kethfer set down his tablet and looked directly at Jake. Jake, I need to ask you something important. When you were working on this assignment, did you consider any other approaches? Did you think about the gentle methods your classmates used? Jake nodded. Sure, I thought about using rocket engines or solar collectors or gravitational fields. But all of those seemed really complicated and slow. When I have a simple problem, I like simple solutions. And this problem seems simple to you? The professor asked. Yeah, Jake said. Big rock in wrong place. Need to move big rock to right place. Pretty straightforward. The professor's colors shifted to deep, thoughtful purple. What would you consider a complicated problem? Jake thought for a moment. Well, like figuring out how to make different alien species get along and work together peacefully. Or designing a government system that's fair to everyone. Or curing diseases that affect different biology types. He gestured at his diagram. Again, moving rocks around is just physics. People problems are much harder. Professor Kethver looked around at his students who were all staring at Jake with new understanding. Class, I think we have learned something very important today. We have seen that there are many different ways to approach the same problem, and that our backgrounds shape how we think. He turned back to Jake. Your solution is not only correct, it's brilliant in its simplicity. You have shown us that sometimes. The most direct path is also the best path. Athene raised her hand again. Professor, does this mean that Jake gets the highest grade? Professor Kethver's body glowed with amused gold. Well, all of your solutions were mathematically correct and would work. But Jake's solution would actually solve the problem in the real world quickly and efficiently. He paused, his colors shifting to serious silver. However, I am going to recommend that Jake take some additional safety courses before we let him. Design any more solutions involving nuclear weapons? The class laughed, and Jake grinned. That's probably a good idea, he said. As the students packed up their things and prepared to leave, they were all talking excitedly about Jake's presentation. Some were amazed by the simplicity of his solution. Others were shocked by how casually humans thought about using nuclear weapons. All of them were seeing their human classmate in a completely new light. Xanthus walked up to Jake as he was putting away his tablet. Jake, I have to ask, what other simple solutions do humans have for problems we think are complicated? Jake thought about it. Well, if you guys ever have trouble with pirates or hostile aliens, we could probably help with that. Humans are really good at fighting. Fighting? Xanthus asked nervously. Yeah, we've had lots of practice. Don't worry, Jake said with a friendly smile. We only fight the bad guys. As they walked out of the classroom together, Xanthus wondered what other surprises her human friend might have in store for them.